Welcome back. This is episode 66 in our Let's Play series for Space Engineers, Survival Mode. I got it working. It's not pretty, excuse me, and it can still use some work in terms of how close it gets you. I was erring on the side of safety, um, but I have two waypoints set up in here so far. It will fly us out to the ice station. The ice station is definitely a little bit more dangerous because the ice station in particular um, is behind an asteroid. But it does the orientation and then it accelerates you up to the speed that you provide it with. I set it to 20 for now. It cancels out your other velocities, and then when it gets within 1,000 kilometers, it will slow you down. Or I'm sorry, 1,000 meters, 1 kilometer. It will slow you down. So this is going to take us a little while actually to get here at 20 meters per second. And like I said, it could still use some work. There's no tolerance on the actual forward speed that you're going. So if it's not exactly 20, it's going to um, try to adjust your speed. So the forward and backward thrusters are pretty much always active. The lateral thrusters are pretty active too, but that's a little bit better. So I might need to adjust the tolerances and all that stuff so that it's a little bit more forgiving and power efficient. But while this is flying, we will go over the code here, and the code is still very much a mess. It's even worse than the functionality is. Um, but I added in a dictionary here for the acceleration in each direction. So this is just keeping track of how much acceleration we have in each direction. The only one that we really care about at this point um, is backwards, and that's what's displaying here, 6.54 meters per second per second. Because that's the one that we're using to determine what our stopping distance is, which is this right here. So as soon as we're within that plus a kilometer, it will put full brakes on. And I think that's working more or less correctly. I think the max effective thrust that it's getting is related to the power, or it might not be. But anyway, so update autopilot got some updates here. We were doing the thrusters already. Now we're doing the acceleration as well. But we have to clear the acceleration each time, because otherwise it'll find the key and just add, and the acceleration will keep growing every time it runs through here, and that's not right, um, because we need to add to each thruster. So it does need to be additive, but it has to start from 0, so we clear it out each time. There may be a better way to reset that to 0. That's my weakness in C# showing there, because if you try to do it for each loop to reset these to 0, most of the ways I've found to do it, with the dictionary in particular, um, it says you're trying to change the enumerator and throws an exception. That's a problem. So anyway, I just wiped it out and started it fresh. Um, so there's two different conditions here. It'd be nice if I could merge them into one, but I can't. So that's how that is. Instead of doing the thrust thing where we were just gonna, start thrusting, I just skipped to FLYTO because I don't really see a point in having thrust, like where it just lines you up and starts you moving. Really we're just going to want to FLYTO, so I have it all under FLYTO. I pulled out the get waypoint target stuff from orient ship, so that it's all happening the same way for orient ship and for FLYTO. And this would be nice if I could pull it out as well, but I'm not doing that. The actual orienting, because that's all being done basically by copying the code from orient ship. Where it gets different is that we are, first of all, putting a whole bunch of extra stuff out on the status. Like this is already in orient ship. This is just our pitch and yaw offset that we had for orient ship already. However, this is our current velocity, and this transformation, which also needs to be cleaned up. When you get ship velocities, it'll give you a linear velocity and an angular velocity. Angular velocity is our rotation. We don't care about that. We want the linear velocity. But it gives you the linear velocity in absolute space. So it's not relative to the ship. We can make that relative to the ship by using the same sort of trick that we used for the gyros. Because you remember, when we are transforming the vectors here, we transform it first to an absolute rotation by going around the origin, because that's what we're calculating it based off of, and then we transform it from the absolute rotation to the query block's rotation, or the gyro's rotation. So if we just take this second part here, that is doing this. So it's taking our velocity vector relative to the world and making it relative to the ship. Because we don't really care about it relative to the world, and that's really confusing to try to work with. So if we make it relative to the ship, then we can just get rid of all of our x and y and make our z, negative whatever our speed's supposed to be, and that means we're going forward at the speed we told it to go. So that's all being output onto the autopilot status, and this is kind of a messy way to do that too. It doesn't look very clean, but we'll work on that. Then we're calculating the distance from our coordinates to where we are, which is the length of subtracting these two vectors. Then the stopping distance, and this is a formula that you can work out. It's basically speed squared divided by 2 times acceleration. This should realistically be the speed we're actually going, rather than the speed that we targeted, because it's possible that we're already too close and we're not actually going that speed. Like, we're not able to accelerate to that speed before we need to stop, so that's not perfectly accurate that way either. But this is outputting all of that stuff down here, so the distance, then the acceleration that we have in the backward direction, then what the stopping distance worked out to. This is all copied from the orient ship stuff, except for this part right here. If the gyro override for the first gyro, doesn't really matter which one it is, but just pick the first one because the first one will always be there. If the gyro override is turned on, then we're done. We're not going to try to move the ship, which is what comes next. So we want to make sure we're oriented correctly, because this override gyro turns the gyro override on, and then it turns it back off if it's in the appropriate position. If it's not in the appropriate position, then it'll stay on. So if this has been turned off, then we'll continue here. If our x velocity is less than -1, then we need to fire the thrusters to the right. And I'm just doing 1% here. This apply thrust calls this method. Just goes through each thruster in that particular direction and sets the thrust override percentage to whatever we pass in. So I'm just using 10% for now. Again, this is something that could afford to be rewritten a little bit so that it's, somewhat based on the velocity that we're going, ties in the acceleration, actually cares about all that. Because, if you've got a huge x velocity here going at 10%, you're going to end up pretty offset by the time you're, actually down to 0. So you're applying a lot more thrust than you need to. By basically, slowing down this slowly. So that could use some adjusting. Anyway, if it's negative, then apply thrust to the right, turn off thrust to the left. If it's positive, turn off thrust to the right, turn on thrust to the left again at 10%. If it's inside of this range, if it's between -0.1 and +0.1, then just shut the thrust off from the left-right direction for both of them. Same thing for Y. If it's negative, turn down off, up on. If it's positive, turn down on, up off. If it's within the range, turn them both off. Now this one's a little bit different because it's not the range surrounding 0, it's just speed. And realistically, this should be a tolerance, so this should be less than, speed minus whatever, speed plus, speed plus whatever. And it is negative, just because that's how forward happens to work relative to the ship. Anyway, if it's exactly equal to speed, it'll come into here and turn forward and backward off. Like I said, this could use some tolerance, and this could use being substituted in for a constant that we can adjust, kind of like we do up here with with all these stuff. Anyway, that's our movement. Then here's where we stop. If distance is less than stopping distance plus 1,000 meters. If current velocity, and this is our actual velocity in total, it's not caring about the various components, is greater than 0.1. So if we're going, 0.1 meters per second in any direction, doesn't matter which one, then we're going to apply full thrust backwards. And that, again, is not really that great, because what we should be doing is, applying full thrust in whatever direction we're going so that we'll stop. But by the time we get to this, usually that's appropriate and works well enough. If, on the other hand, our current velocity length is less than 0.1, then the autopilot mission is complete, because we're still inside the stopping distance here. We don't want to set it to complete if we're not outside the stopping distance. That would be down here. But that's it. It is deceptively simple, I guess, and it did take me a little bit of time to figure all this stuff out. Wasn't too bad, but it does need some rewrites to make it work well with everything else. I also changed this code a little bit. It used to say if it's equal to 3. Now I want it to be greater than or equal to 3, because we might have that speed parameter on the end there. And that's what we're checking for here with the default of 80. So if there is no speed parameter, we're going to go 80. If there is a speed parameter, then we'll go whatever that speed is. Oh, I don't know what I changed. I changed something, I guess. What did I change? I don't remember now. Anyway, we have about 5 clicks left. And there's 2 bookmarks there, so that's not necessarily going to match up perfectly. That plus the distance here is lagging, because this display only updates every 100 ticks, whereas our HUD updates every tick. So we're going to be a little bit behind. And again, that's showing us actually the distance to the rendezvous, I think. And that's really what we should be setting this for. But I didn't put in that bookmark, I put in this one. So that's what we're doing. I don't know if you can hear it, but the thrusters are kind of whirring on and off. So there's a lot of activity as far as the thrusters are concerned. And we're using 29% of our power because of how much they're doing. There we go. So now those have split. You can see that we are oriented correctly because we're pointed straight at the mark that we actually want. And the distance is more accurate now. And we do have enough room with the 1,000 click or 1,000 meter, the 1 click margin on the stopping distance, that we're not going to crash into the asteroid here. When I was testing it earlier, I did go past it because I had the if condition set up incorrectly, but it worked fine on the SIC, and I did, get too close and still not crash into the asteroid. So I'm confident that we're not going to crash into the asteroid this time either. But we will be doing that in about another 1 or 2 kilometers, kilometer and a bit. But we do not have any obstacle detection on here right now, so that's a good reason to keep that margin as high as it is for the time being. Once we have obstacle detection, we'll be able to say, if you can go closer, but if you are about to run into something, then steer around it. That's going to be kind of tricky. I don't know what all comes back in the raycast return data from the camera. That's how we're going to be doing that. Because the camera can basically do a raycast thing. There's some pretty cool videos on what that does, but I'll have to actually play with it myself and see what sort of information we actually get out of it, and see if we can figure out what the easiest way to go around an obstacle is based on that information. But the stopping distance calculation seems to be pretty good. I was 2 meters inside of where I wanted to be for the trip to the SIC last time I did it. And I set up the actual complete condition while I was kind of flying around right around that margin. Yeah, I just overshot it. That's kind of a problem. Okay, so that part needs some work too. It did work on the SIC. I'm not sure why it didn't there. I'll have to look at it. But it's only applying 10% to correct for that now, so we're backing off pretty far as fast as we got going. So it's going to try to accelerate us again now up to 20. Whether it gets there or not remains to be seen. Once it gets inside of that, 1030.59 meters from the point, the waypoint, it'll try to stop us again. And at that point, it's really just a question of, are we going to get into the update in time? Yeah, there we go. I got it. So our velocity is inside the tolerance to just be like, okay, we're done. So yeah, that's what happened there, is we were outside of the velocity tolerance to say we're done at that point. So it just kept the thruster override turned on. Until we were no longer within the stopping distance. And then it had to slow us down using the 10% thing. But that's that. We can turn around and head back to the SIC now. I'm not going to sit here through that whole thing because I was doing the code review the first time, so that made it go by a little quicker. Actually, you know what I could do? I could do a manual command here because I have this set up on the hotbar to use the existing waypoints and at 20, but I can set this here to go up to 60, and hopefully this will not be a problem. But now our stopping distance is significantly higher. It's 200 and something instead of 30. And it's going to keep us going past, 20 meters per second. We're going to accelerate up to 60 meters per second here. So this trip will go faster. But yeah, so improvements that I want to make to this, I want to clean up the code, first of all, because it's nasty. And I'll need to clean up the stopping distance thing so it's a little bit more reliable. I'll need to work on the forward velocity so it's got a little bit more tolerance in it and might save some thruster usage. I want to make the thruster usage proportional to the offset for what we want our velocity to be. So if we're going at negative 0.1 x or whatever, then it'll be minimal thrust and it'll get us actually to 0. Whereas if we're going at 10 meters per second in the x direction, it'll use a lot more thrust and it'll slow us down quicker. But now we're at 60. We've got a 275 meter, I think that is, stopping distance. So it's going to start slowing us down further out, but it should still be enough. We'll see how the power situation handles that, because we still don't have enough actual reactors on here to power the 4 thrusters that are going forward and backward at the same time. Now we're basing our acceleration off of max effective thrust, and I think that's supposed to be for atmosphere stuff and to take into account how useful ion engines are, for example, in an atmosphere, which is not very. But they may be accounting for power as well. I can't really see how they would. because they don't necessarily know how many thrusters you're going to be using at the same time. So I don't think it's doing that. We'll see if this is a problem. That may be why we're overshooting by a couple meters. If that's all that we're doing, especially going this direction with the SIC where we don't actually have an obstacle and we end up being about 1 kilometer off, that won't be an issue. But we'll be able to kind of see how that's determining it and what impact our power shortage has on things. But if we check here, our thrusters take 200 kilowatts. We've got 2 reactors, so we're able to do 1,000 kilowatts. You can see the thrust override jumping back and forth there on that engine, because this is the forward one. Like, this would be a lot more stable if we had that kind of tolerance there for the speed. We must be using a lot of power somewhere else. Where are we using all that power? We've got about 200 kilowatts that's unaccounted for. That's 2. There it is. It's all right there. It's all the antenna. So if we turn down the antenna broadcast radius, which we could probably afford to do in most situations, I'll go ahead and sign that. Excuse me. If we actually use it to do intergrid communication stuff, we're usually setting this within the code, but just because I'm looking at it now. So that's where all of our other power is going. So we're pretty close on how much power we have, you know, in terms of being able to actually run 4 engines. So 1 more reactor should be sufficient. And we can put that on the front without it impacting our profile too much. I wouldn't want to put it on the side because that'd make us wider. Being a little bit longer isn't a big deal. Being wider or taller would be more of a problem for me. We could even do 2 on the front there. Might do that. And realistic, you know, 3 more here going on all those different conveyor ports as well. But we are coming up on our stopping distance. There we go. Power overload. And yeah, we overshot that a little bit. And now it's going to back us off past that because it missed the window for stopped. Now it's going super fast. Yeah, so that needs a little bit of work. I think what we can do there relatively easily is we can just increase this number here to 0.5. Because even 1 tick, when you've got, you know, 4 ion thrusters running, you might miss that. And yeah, see, it's backed us off a full 2 or 3 kilometers more than we want to, just because it's taken so long for it to slow down now. Because it just goes full throttle back, and it doesn't care how fast we end up going until we're outside of that stopping radius. And then it starts slowing us down with 10%. And the faster you're going, the more of a problem that's going to be, because you're that much more likely to miss the window of being within that velocity tolerance, because the length there, like basically we had kind of a 0.2 meter per second window there. Like if we were under zero point 0.1 going forward or over zero point 0.1 going backward, under zero point 0.1 going backward, that's the point when it would say complete. If we back through that within the 1 tick it takes to update, if we pass right through that, then it's not going to work, and it's going to continue accelerating us until we get outside of that stopping radius. So we spent an extra, 200 meters accelerating fully backwards. So now we've got a little bit more room there. Got 0.5 to 0.5. Another thing I could do is just tell it to turn the inertial dampers on as well. See, we didn't quite get all the way up to 60 meters per second there. And now our forward motion is a little bit higher than it really should be. But that's okay. Like I said, we still need to do some tweaks on that. But working pretty well. I'm definitely satisfied with the amount of progress I made for the amount of time it took me to be able to record the follow-up episode here. Next episode, rather than doing more scripting, we will take another break from that. Probably fly all the way out to the ice station, actually. Do a pickup there. I don't think we don't really need it. We've got plenty of ice. But we'll go ahead and do a pickup there anyway. And copy the ice station code. Again, I could pull it off of GitHub, but that's a little cheaty given that I've got it and I just didn't save it. And I also do want to turn up the antenna radius on that so that I can make contact with it from the SIC. That's kind of the main idea there, the more important bit. Also, it might be a good idea just to go ahead and make the stopping radius configurable. So I could say, fly to SIC at 60 meters per second and stop within 500 meters of it so that it's not hard-coded in there like that. That would be good. Anyway, yeah, so next time we're going to make that ice station run, adjust the words. Adjust the antenna radius, pick up the code, and bring it back so we can put it on the uranium station. And until then, likes, comments, and verbal abuse are welcome. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.